Project Binky in colour. Starring Nick Blackhurst. Also starring Richard Brunning. And Rex Hamilton as Abraham Lincoln. Tonight's episode, Wire in the Blood. Coming up in episode 19, Nick gets a shameless plug. I make a rod for my own back. And we both go all a bit continental. At the end of the previous episode, we'd absolutely definitely nailed down the location for the battery. However, during one of our high-powered business meetings, involving lots of tea and a little bit of forward planning, we decided we need to relocate it. But there's a twist. Yes, that's much better. And I finally managed to persuade Nick to use that bought bracket. But in return, I've had to allow him to use some more captive fasteners to fix it to the floor. No one likes a bracket more than Nick. And one with captive fasteners makes it into some sort of Blackhurst nirvana. So this bracket will involve all the usual stuff. Now, ordinarily, on a rally car, we wouldn't mount the battery directly to the floor, as it's quite vulnerable to a stone or rock strike from underneath. But as Binky is a road car, and therefore is unlikely to encounter the gnarly forest tracks, we're pretty confident that floor mounting it will not cause us an issue. After quickly whipping up the mounting plates and countersinking the holes, machine screws get a quick sand off to remove the zinc coating before being assembled on the plates, ready for a bit of hot TIG action. The positions are marked out on the floor, and even though it's meant to be welded through, the primer is removed to make sure we get some good penetration. Finally, the welds are removed with the finger sander. This must have been a special occasion as Nick's changed the belt. After drilling 4 holes in the bought not built bracket, the battery is ready to get bolted down to the floor. That is a nice snug fit. Looks secure enough? Think that's a job well done. Excellent.
With the battery installed in its actual final resting place, I suppose it now makes sense to make up some battery cables.
I suppose it does. This 25 square millimetre super flexible competition battery cable is rated to 170 amps, which should be plenty for our needs. It's ever so easy, believe me, to forget to slide the heat shrink over the cable before crimping the terminal on. Nick sidesteps that potential snafu with aplomb. Yes, to make a success out of crimping connectors to these big wires, we raided eBay for an hydraulic crimping tool. It can be used for lots of other things too, like making up throttle, clutch and gear change cables, so it's a handy thing to have about. It also does a really nice job. A quick blow over with the hot air gun sorts the heat shrink, and the battery end of this cable is ready to be installed. So while Nick gets on with that, I'm gonna get the kettle on. We've whipped up an earth cable using the same 25 square millimeters wire, only in black, but left it long for now, and there's a bit to do before nailing down the location of the battery isolator. As we won't be able to access the battery now it's under the seat, we thought it prudent to add an isolator for emergencies. Right, so now we have to deal with the rest of the car's wiring. I can hardly wait.
This is the full wiring loom out of the Mini. And it's about what you'd expect for a 38-year-old wiring loom. The fact that it was only 34 years old when we started this project has got no bearing on its condition. It might be scabbier than a bat's ass, but believe it or not, everything worked on the car before we took it apart. The trouble is, Richard has made me put lots and lots more electricity through this vehicle, so we don't have enough wires here. So the way I see it, we've got two choices. We need a bigger loom. We can either fix, modify and add to this one, or we can start from scratch.
Surely you can't be serious.
So, given those two, frankly, quite unappealing options, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go straight to secret option number 3, which you never knew existed, but was the right answer all along. A lot of you married fellas should really have picked up on that. Yep, we're going to do a loom transplant. This is the wiring loom out of a 2004 MG ZR, which hopefully goes some way to explaining some of our electrical component choices. Anyway, 2004 and a Rover is about as late as you can go without running into shared wiring and CAN bus systems that we really don't want to be dealing with on this project. Now this lot's been around for ages and it's pretty reliable because it's got its beginnings in an old Civic. So yeah, a lot of this will fit your Honda. Anyway, in what can only be described as an act of biblical optimism, I took this out of a car about 4 years ago, so I think before we go anywhere else, we need to get this out and make sure it all still works.
The first thing we need to do is lay out the loom on the floor, roughly in the shape of how it was in the MG. This part is going to bruise our knees. Badly. That's quite a lot of wiring to go into the Mini, and unfortunately, it doesn't end there. There's this one, and another, and this, plus this, and another, and finally, this. Phew, I think that's it. Now we need to plug all those sublooms into the main wiring harness. There, that was easy. To test it all thoroughly, we need to plug in all of the components that are connected to this loom. That'll take a while, so grab a cuppa and let me tell you a story. While we were staring at the loom, wondering where to start with it and how to incorporate it into the Mini, we stumbled across an interesting tale of automotive collaboration and demise. The story starts back in 1979 when Triumph signed an agreement with Honda to assemble in the UK what was the Japanese-made Honda Ballade and badge it as the Triumph Acclaim. This was replaced in 1984 by the Rover 200 SD3 and again in 1989 as the Rover 200 R8 or Mark II. This eventually became the Rover 25 in 1999 and the sporty MG ZR in 2001. Our loom is from a 2004 MG ZR. Honda ended their interest in Rover in 1994 after the group was sold to BMW. But 10 years after that, their influence is still seen deep within the car in the form of these Sumitomo connectors that make up a bulk of the main car loom. You can also see the BMW impact with these connectors in the engine bay. BMW clearly thought that the Rover assembly wasn't efficient enough, and the injector loom, along with connectors for other sensors, was separated off the main wiring onto its own sub-loom fitted at the engine assembly plant. When BMW sold off what remained of the Rover group in 2000, you can see the effect of that in the loom as well. Here's a Rover marked connector, and on all the facelifted cars from 2004, they used these aptly named AMP EconoSeal connectors for the new light fittings. The facelift was ultimately doomed as MG Rover collapsed in 2005. We never imagined you could see a story in automotive wiring loom, but an obsessive attention to detail threw up this tale by looking carefully at all the connectors.
This is good.
Now I know what you're thinking, you can't test all that without some good earths. Don't worry, got you covered. With the earths in place, we can connect the battery and see if it all works. First, let's try the remote central locking. Brilliant. Ignition and clocks? Yep, looking good. Best go for an engine start. Terrific. Check that the heater fan works. Great, that's all okay. And now the electric windows, including auto on the driver's side. Brilliant, this is going well so far. How about the front wipers? Check, lovely. And the front washer? Yep. And the rear washer? Super. What about the rear wiper we fitted last time? Looks good to me. And now let's find out if Nick's got the horn. Always. Glove box light? Yep. Don't know why though. We haven't got room for a glove box. Okay then. Front lights. Sides. Heads. Main beam. Fogs. Left indicator. And right indicator. Lovely. Best do a thorough light check at the rear of the car too, though.
Sides, left indicator, right indicator, hazards, fogs, new brakes, 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 brakes. Reversing lights. Full house.
And don't worry, we didn't forget them banging tunes.
Well, it isn't really a surprise that everything still functions as it should. It is a bit of a relief. But more importantly, it's a very valuable piece of information for the installation. Once all of this is integrated into the car, if something doesn't work, we know for sure it's a problem of our own making and not something that was pre-existing. So the only question that remains is, how do we get this now fully tested but much more voluminous wiring loom into a Mini? Well, let's find out.
We're going to start by stripping off all the loom tape, conduit and chassis fixings from this section of the wiring. The shape of the loom as it sat in the Rover isn't too far from what we need in the Mini, but it's going to need some considerable modification to make it work. Unbinding it gives us the chance to manipulate it much more easily. I'm adding tie wraps every now and again to retain its current shape and stop it becoming an unwieldy pile of coloured inedible spaghetti. As I go along, I'm relabeling all of the connectors, as Nick's 4-year-old blue tank tape and marker pen labels are falling off, and some are unreadable. See, that's much neater. After a couple of hours, I've managed to turn this into this. It's a good start, but there's loads to do yet.
So now that I've unwound the loom and relabeled it all, the next stage is to cut out any of the bits that we don't need. For example, this is the plug that goes to the SRS ECU. Now we're not using it and we don't need it, so we're going to cut out all of these wires.
The SRS, or Supplementary Restraint System on the MG, includes stuff like airbags and seatbelt pretensioners, along with that annoying alarm when you haven't done your seatbelt up. Sod that, it's all coming out. This terminal extractor kit is a handy tool to have about when attempting to de-pin the connectors. The trick is to find the right shaped prong to push the retaining clip, then they pop out quite easily. There, sorted.
As we want to retain quite a lot of what's in this connector, to get rid of the SRS loom, I had to de-pin the plug. But with the lambda sensor, this is actually on separate 4 wires. So all I've got to do is cut off the end and then feed it back through the loom.
The rear ABS sensors are also on a separate plug, and as they were unceremoniously wrenched from the hubs, once I separated the connector from the others, these pulled out easily too.
So that's one part of one section of the loom done. Only another 26 miles of wiring to go.
This pile is everything I managed to pull out of those looms. That was a long and laborious job if there ever was one, and there were no shortcuts. To do all that took thick end of 2 days. You have to take it wire by wire and make sure you don't make any mistakes. I made 2 and got away with a 3rd. Never mind, as Nick always tells me, we'll fix it in post. Now that all the looms are stripped and pared back to their essentials, let's get on with fitting it to the car.
It was a good plan. Take a wiring loom from a larger car than you need with all of the electrical devices you want to use on it, shorten up a few wires, job done. Unfortunately, we have been stymied once again by the Mini's diminutive dimensions. You see, in the MGZR, the fuse box here lives up by the throttle pedal. Yeah, not a chance it's going there. The power distribution board lives under the bonnet by the battery. Yeah, not a chance there either. So, now what we're faced with is relocating both of these and making the wires work.
You may remember we moved the battery position earlier, and it wasn't just for tits and pickles. There was method in our madness. The fuse box and the power distribution board are going here in front of the battery. What we need now then is some sort of fabricated metal fixture that both boxes can attach to that will ultimately get secured to the car. A bracket, if you will. So while Nick resides content in his happy place, I think it's time for me to get the funk out. That bracket was a little more complex than anticipated, as there's mounting holes on multiple levels that all have to be aligned perfectly. But with it sorted, the alarm control gets installed, along with the power distribution board, and finally the fuse box. These 3 tabs are to hold some errant relays dangling from the loom. Right, now it's time to get this loom in the car and see what's what.
Okay mate, send it in.
Now it needs connecting up to the boards.
You know what, mate? This might actually be easier to sort on the bench first. Oh yeah, much better. Well, that's the fuse box mostly plugged in, but it's not going to do us any good at the moment because it's got no power going to it. Now, its power comes from this battery distribution board, which is now right next to it, but in the MG-ZR was 2 meters or so away down the loom in the engine bay, so that's where the plugs are down here. So, before we put any of this wiring in the car, I think we can save ourselves some space and some weight by moving those plugs up to where they need to be and cutting down these big thick wires. And we can also save my knees by doing all that on the bench.
Tracing this brown power feed wire through the thick stack of cables is relatively straightforward. It's the big brown one. Give it a little tug every now and again and its location becomes apparent. Here's a little nugget for you. If you come across any connectors that have housings of 2 colours, like this one, there's a very good chance you'll need to remove part of it to get to the pin retainers. Some single colour connectors are 2-piece as well, but the 2 colour hint is a good rule of thumb. I think Nick has found the connector he's looking for. It's that blue one. It's also a good idea to make note of how the wires go into the plug. We just snap photos to refer back to if needed. Here's a single colour plug that happens to be 2-piece, and after flicking off the cover, it's a simple task to poke the extractor tool down the hole and remove the pin and wire in one go. Now let's pull that power feed back through the loom and see where it ends up.
And that's when you find this mess here. Nothing to do with us, the blue tape and the splicing.
No, that's a factory finish.
This is what we found under the blue tape.
I mean, it seems to have worked fine, so it seems reasonable to replicate that joint on our shortened wire. The new toy is getting a workout. I knew it would come in handy. A little heat shrink, then some extra black tape to seal the 2 different thicknesses better, complete the job. It's black tape, so we know it's something we've buggered around with. Now it's just a case of popping the connector back in the housing, then the plug can go back in the power board. Lovely! So after a few hours and plenty of cups of tea, we've ended up with this lot of superfluous wire. And at the back of the boards, something that looks a bit like a 3-dimensional toddler's scribble. And that will never do. See? That's a bit better. So now it's ready to go back in the car. We just need to attend to this cheeky earth terminal. Nothing a pair of side cutters, some strippers, not that kind sadly, wire strippers, a new ring terminal and a good pair of crimpers cannot fix. Sorted. Now let's get this bolted into the Mini. Now I must admit, electrics has never really been my thing. Angry pixies galloping up and down twisted strands of wire seems a bit too much like witchcraft for my liking. However, it is very colourful if nothing else. Who knows, when we get to the end of this part of the build, I may even tolerate it. This is just bolting in a battery live to the main distribution board. Don't worry, the battery isolator is switched off so there's no chance of being zapped.
Okay, I think we're actually ready to start running some wires, and it makes sense to me to sort of follow the power if you like. So first up, we're going to be running these big heavy duty buggers from the fuse box to the ignition switch. I'd really rather avoid it on this high amperage stuff especially, but at some point we're inevitably going to come into cutting and joining wires, and that's absolutely fine as long as it's done properly. What is properly? Well, that depends very much on who you ask, because there seems to be 2 distinct camps. There's the solderers and there's the crimpers. I've tried both, but I've got to be honest, with our usual diet of high vibration race and rally cars, I've had much more success with crimping, so that's what we'll be using in here. But, you know, soldering, crimping, we could do either. One thing we definitely won't be doing is any soldering, and that's because, and I think we can all agree on this, there's just no such word.
We got lucky with the main lives, as they used to go from the fuse box to the distribution board, so after we pulled them out, they were long enough by a margin to reach the ignition switch. And we managed to source the correct terminals for the plug, so we just need to cut the wires to length, crimp the terminals on, and stick them back in the plug. This short fly lead from the same plug needs extending down to the fuse box. And we managed to track down the right spec and colours of wire to do all that in one unbroken run. Our hard spiky thing warning indicator is in the way of the column switches, so it needs cutting down to size. I'm sure there's a gag in there somewhere. It's upside down, mate. There you go. We've extended these wires in the same way as before. This is for the main light switch. The rest of the functions on the column switches are taken care of by these 3 smaller plugs. Again, we've managed to find the right colour and spec of wire, and this time we've also got the correct plugs too, so we can make up some patch leads to bring everything neatly down to the fuse box. The two of us spent very many late night hours researching and sourcing all the right gear for this job. In fact, in the unlikely event of either of us appearing on Mastermind, we'd take obsolete Sumitomo connectors as our specialist subject. A quick bit of temporary tape keeps all the wires together neatly, and pinning up the other end of the leads completes the job. That's one patch lead finished. Do it twice more and you end up with these. We've staggered the lengths where they join the main loom to keep from having 3 plastic plugs all occupying a similar space and being all a bit bulky. Finally, the patch leads just need connecting to the column switches, and that's the bulk of the wiring lengthening process sorted.
There's still plenty more wiring to come, but that's about as far as I can go until we decide what we're doing about a dash and centre console. Truth be told, that's probably enough wiring for one episode anyway, so I'm guessing you're not too concerned. And that's okay. We've got plenty of other things for you to be concerned about. Rich?
Now, we've spent a lot of time and an awful lot of effort getting electricity to run around the car to its various components. What we haven't got yet is a way of getting power back into the battery, and that is the job of the alternator. And that gives us a bit of a problem. On the Celica, the alternator normally sits here. But unfortunately, that bit of real estate is now taken up by the exhaust. So tune in next time to see if we can fabricate our way out of this latest crisis. Be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode from the files of Project Binky.